If you have been following my capsule wardrobe project, you know that I have planned to make a pair of pants. And I have been procrastinating making those pants because I knew in my head what I wanted them to look like, but I don't know what that type of pants are called. What that type is called. Yes, is. I don't know what that type of pants is called. That sounds wrong still. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I have been procrastinating those pants because how do you Google the words that you don't know? You know what I'm saying? So last night I couldn't sleep and I was scrolling through Pinterest and I saw this pair of shorts and I was like, those are pretty cute shorts. Now, what are those called? And someone in the comments on Pinterest had asked what those shorts are called, and someone else had replied, paper bag shorts. There we go, that was all I needed. So I have been down a rabbit hole for the past 12 hours looking at how the heck to make my own, and most of them have a gathered waistline. I think I'm gonna go pleats, and I think I'm also going to add a front zipper, but other than that, I think we have a good starting point. So I'm going to finally start working on these pants. I bought this fabric in like October, maybe, or September or something, and I don't quite remember what the actual fiber content is. I want to say there's some amount of wool in here. Honestly, I can't remember. I think it's a suiting fabric though, so it's nice and opaque and soft on both sides and like thin enough so it's not going to be super bulky where I add pleats. But we're gonna get started with the whole process right now. I considered drafting a pattern by myself, and then I decided that that sounded like a lot of work, so I pulled out a pair of pants that fit me pretty well, and I'm going to trace those and get my pattern from there, like the lazy person that I am. As usual, I'm making my pattern on some wrapping paper. I folded the pants in half and lined up the side seam with the long edge of the paper. Then I just traced around the pants, and that's literally the secret. I made sure to fold certain parts down to get an accurate shape, like the back rise of the pants while tracing the fronts, for example. I then went over my pen lines with permanent marker and added some extra lines for the pockets and the fly. I fussed around with the shapes a bit until I was happy with them. Then I could cut out the pattern pieces. I repeated the process for the back of the pants. Feel free to fold them a bit differently to get a more accurate shape if you need to, such as I did with the backs by opening them up to trace the back rise more accurately. For the pocket pattern, I laid the front pants pattern on some paper and traced around the shape. Only the front pocket pieces need this shape cut out of it. The others will follow the lines for the top and sides of the pants. Then it was mock-up time. I made one mock-up that frankly sucked, so here's how the second one looked. Hello. The second mock-up has been completed, and you know, they're pretty good. I made a couple of adjustments, and I think we're ready to cut into the real fabric. Just to summarize the changes that I made to the pattern. So I made one mock-up and it was a little tight in the butt, surprising nobody. And so I Googled, I think it was pants pattern too small in the butt, and I found a very helpful image that told me to cut a little cross out and kind of just expand those, you know, parts of the pattern. So I taped another piece of paper underneath here. You can probably see the like T shape here. And so that was the first change I made. And then I made a second mock-up and everything fit well, except it was really big at the waist. So I did add a little dart at the top, which I didn't mark. I think I'm just gonna do that in real time on the actual fabric. It was still big at the waist, so I took out this triangle here and I've just folded it under, and I might actually leave that because why not? And again, I took out a little triangle at the front, and with that one, I also, for the fuller pocket piece, so the full pocket piece, I taped this piece on so I can just use one pattern piece for both types of pocket, but this has the same fold that I took out of the waist, and those are all the changes. Other than that, the front piece was fine, so I'm just gonna cut out the fabric now. I also just want to say that I sewed the zipper I'm going to be using into my mock-up because I've never made a zipper fly like this before, and I am quite impressed with myself. Would you look at that? Whoa! Zip zip. Also, this doesn't have the like fly underguard thing, and when I was zipping the mock-up up on myself, I zipped my tummy skin in. So it is a necessity. We will be including one in the actual piece. Now came the time to abuse my rickety old bones on these unnaturally hard tile floors. In order to make sure the pieces were cut on the straight grain, I cut them out one at a time rather than on the fold. This also ensured I could spend as much time as possible sitting on the freezing cold, incredibly hard floor. Love it. I didn't add seam allowance to my pattern, so I'm adding about a centimeter here. I also added some extra length at the bottom of the cuff. In hindsight, it would have been easier to add a bit more seam allowance so I could serge the edges of the fabric, but I didn't do that. For the pocket pieces, I wanted the print to match up from the pants into the bit of pocket that will be seen through the opening, so I laid the front pants pieces down on the fabric, lined up the print, and cut out the back pocket pieces from there. I pinned each pocket piece to the corresponding pants piece so I could match them up later. The front pieces wouldn't be seen, so I didn't worry about matching the prints for those. Once all the pieces were cut out, I began by running a zigzag stitch around the sides of each piece. If I were more sure of both my confidence in my pattern and my ability to negotiate a serger around the curved lines, I would have serged the edges, but I didn't want to take the risk of ruining my pieces, so I opted for a zigzag stitch. With the pieces prepared, I could begin sewing together the pockets. The front pocket pieces were sewn with right sides together to the front pants pieces, lining up the little half circle cutout at the sides. At first they're sewn to the outside of the pants, which feels so wrong, but once they're sewn on, I notch the curves, turn the pocket pieces to the wrong side, and press the seam flat. Then I top stitched the pocket opening about half a centimeter away from the edge to keep everything nice and clean. The two pocket pieces could then be sewn together. The print was first matched between the back pocket piece and the front pants piece, so that the print looked cohesive between the layers. Then the pocket pieces were pinned and sewn around the inner edges, leaving the top and side seams open for now, as shown here. Before I sew the pants pieces together, I want to make sure that the pockets are really strong, so I'm first going to trim the seam allowance down, and then I'm going to sew another line of stitching all around the edge here to make it really strong. And lastly, I'm going to attach a bit of this, I think it's twill tape, around the edge, just from like the side seam of the pant to the waist seam, and then that should hopefully make it so that the pockets are really strong, and it'll add a little bit of bulk just with this extra tape, but I'd rather have strong pockets and like a little bit of a line than like weak pockets and my phone falls to my feet. So that is the plan right now. After trimming the excess, I pinned the tape around the pocket and top stitched it down. I used the smallest stitch length for this and backstitched at the ends to make sure the pocket was extra strong. I left the edges raw because they'd be sewn in at the side seams and would hopefully be protected from fraying. I then basted the pockets to the pants at the side seam and waistband. Now it was time to join the front and back pieces at the side seams. I laid the front piece out flat, then laid the back piece on top with right sides together. The side seam would then be pinned and sewn together with the shortest stitch length. Then the seam could be pressed open below the pocket. I snipped the seam allowance just beneath the pocket and ironed the top part back, as it was too thick to iron open.
Once the fronts and backs were sewn together, it was time to sew up the legs. I folded each pant leg in half with right sides together and pinned and sewed along the inseams. At this point, you should have two separate halves of a pair of pants. To join the two halves together, I turned one leg right side out and placed that one inside of the inside out pant leg. That way they're still right sides together, but it's a little easier to maneuver it under the sewing machine. I lined up the crotch seam and pinned outwards from there. For the front fly, the regular seam stops about a centimeter above where the zipper will stop. I placed a pin here to mark where to backstitch and change the stitch length. The remainder of the seam is just basted closed for now with the longest stitch length. The back of the pants is sewn together normally with a small stitch length. Then it was time for the zipper. With the pants inside out, I pressed the fly pieces open. Then I took my zipper and laid it with the teeth facing down on the right side of the fly, with the left side of the zipper lined up with the seam we basted earlier, making sure to put my arm in front of the camera as much as humanly possible. I changed out my regular machine foot for a zipper foot and folded the rest of the pants aside to sew the zipper to just the fly, getting as close to the zipper teeth as I could. Once the first side was sewn, I zipped the zipper back up, picked up the fly piece, and laid it on top of the other, with the pants laid flat. Then I pinned and sewed the other side of the zipper to the remaining fly piece, backstitching at the ends again. After both sides are sewn, you can remove the basting stitches, keeping the seam closed, and you should have a functional zipper. All that's left to do is top stitch that little J shape on the overlap piece, catching the fly piece on the inside as well to keep the flap laying flat and to reinforce the zipper. If you're using a metal zipper, be extra careful about sewing around the teeth so you don't break your needle. Once the zipper was finished, I started working on the darts and pleats. I don't really have any helpful tips here. I just pinned, basted, and tried the pants on over and over until I was happy with the fit. Once the fit was good, I sewed the darts up more permanently with a shorter stitch length, but I kept the pleats just basted for now. They'd be sewn more permanently later when the waistband is sewn on. I came out to my front room because there's a mirror and I needed to pin my pants. And there's a boy in the laundry sink. What are you doing in there? You want a bath? Why are you in here? So I have taken in this one leg here and I'm just going to trace that shape around the other pant leg and then take in that leg as well. And then I can add the waistband and we're pretty close to done. So hooray. So from the inside I did quite a few alterations and fittings and whatever. So starting out, there's a pleat on both sides of the front and then there are darts in the back, and I also ended up taking in the waist at center back a little. This is the original stitching line and this is the new one, so I'm going to trim that off, and I took it in a bit more at the sides of the waist as well because the waistband was, or the waist area doesn't have a waistband yet, but the waist was a little bit big. First I'm going to even out the other leg, and I also want to add a fly guard thing so that I don't zip up my skin, and so, you know, once you unzip the pants, it's just like not just your crotch out in the open. There's like a little bit of a modesty guard. So yeah, let's alter some pants. Like I said, I traced the alterations from one pant leg to the other, then sewed the second leg to match the first, and then I abandoned the pants for way too long.
I haven't worked on these pants in at least 1 week, possibly 2 weeks, for no reason other than I kind of didn't like how they were looking and I was feeling frustrated, so I just put them aside. And now though, I just tried them on again and I was like, these are good. What's wrong with me? So I'm ready to start working on them again. But now I have this issue where it just looks like crap inside and, you know, they're gonna fray. So I either just have to run a zigzag stitch along the side or serge them. And I do have a serger. I'm just worried that I'll go into the seam or something. Sergers are honestly a little bit scary to me. Maybe I'll just zigzag them. Okay. I'll zigzag them. That'll be fine. So I'm gonna do all that, and then what's left? Then I just have to do, I need the fly facing or like fly guard or whatever the heck that's called, and waistband and ruffle and belt and hem. And that was more things than I thought it was gonna be, but anyway. So yeah, I'm gonna zigzag all these inner bits now.
For which I have no footage, so here's the fly guard. I cut out a rectangle, folded it in half, and serged the long edge, rounding out the bottom to make a J shape. I'm pinning the straight edge to the fly piece here. That's the wrong thing to do. Pin the rounded edge to the fly piece, which is also rounded.
Like duh.
I did eventually fix this, but here's some footage of me doing it the wrong way. Again, make sure you're sewing it to just the fly layer and not to the pants themselves. It was now on to the waistband and the paper bag style pleats. Usually the paper bag part is actually part of the waistband and the waistband is gathered with elastic, but I thought that would be too bulky given my fabric of choice. So I opted for a regular waistband and a pleated layer sewn on separately. I cut out a strip of fabric for my waistband that was double the width of the desired final result, plus 2 centimeters for seam allowance. That's pretty easy on this fabric because I could just follow the squares. I did the same thing for the pleated piece, however I had to cut 2 strips for this and sew them together at the back, so the finished piece would be long enough to account for the pleats. I pinned and sewed the waistband to the right side of the pants first with a short stitch. To finish the ends of the waistband, I folded the seam allowance as normal, then folded it the opposite way and pinned and sewed along the edge. Once the edge is sewn and the excess is trimmed, the waistband can be turned right side out and you're left with a neatly finished edge. This is repeated on both sides of the waistband. To finish the rest of the waistband, the seam allowance is turned under and sewn with a whip stitch. I usually film myself hand sewing at my work table, but in reality I sew about 10 stitches there, then finish the rest sitting on my couch watching TV. And on this occasion there was also a sword in the corner of the room. Makes sense, right? Instead of a button closure, I added a hook and bar at the top of the fly, making sure to only stitch through one layer of the pants so the stitches wouldn't be seen from the right side. The pants could technically be called finished at this point, but I of course wanted to make them more complicated. So I started by adding belt loops. These were made by cutting strips of fabric, folding the outer edges to the middle, folding them in half once more, and top stitching both edges to keep them laying nice and flat. I made 5 belt loops total. 2 for the front just above the pleats, 2 slightly behind the side seams, and 1 at center back. I first sewed the belt loops just beneath the waistband, going back and forth a few times to make sure they were really secure. Then I trimmed the excess and folded them up and top stitched about 5 millimeters away from the fold to keep them in place. I could then fold them over the top of the pants and top stitch at the top as well. That was too many times saying top. It's too much. For the pleated part of the pants, I ironed the strip in half, then serged the opposite end. This would negate the need for tucking in raw ends and would help reduce bulk at the waist. I pleated the strip with knife pleats that would fold outwards from the center front and 1 box pleat at center back. I didn't measure the pleats and instead just used the lines on the fabric as a guide. I had to fuss with the strip a bit to get it lined up correctly, but once it was arranged the way I wanted, I sewed the pleats down by machine about half a centimeter away from the serged edge. I decided to hand sew the strip in so there wouldn't be top stitching from the outside. I first pinned it at center back, then continued around the rest of the waistband. The strip was longer than I needed it to be, but that was an easy fix. Then I could whip stitch the strip to the pants. Up next were the cuffs. I first serged the bottom of the pant legs. I didn't want the zigzag seam allowances visible from the outside, so this required some fancy folding to hide. I first folded the bottom edge inside to form a very wide cuff. Then I flipped it to the outside and pinned and top stitched at the top of the cuff. This should ensure the inside serged edge, the pants, and the fold of the cuff are all sewn together neatly. Finally, all that was left was the belt thing. I cut 2 long strips of fabric, slightly narrower than those used for the waistband, and sewed them together. Then I sewed the strip in half, lengthwise, with right sides together, and turned it right side out with a safety pin. I ironed the strip flat and tapered the ends to a point, finishing them with a whip stitch. And finally, the pants were done. While there are certainly things that could be done better, I absolutely love these pants, and I think they're one of my more professional looking projects, from the outside at least. This is actually the final piece of my capsule wardrobe project, so I'll be sharing my final thoughts on that project soon. Subscribe to my channel for lots more sewing content to come, and I'll see you next time.